I learned long ago that names travel farther than faces. Out on the frontier, among broken moons and drifting stations, a name could become a rumor, a warning, or a prayer. Mine had done all three, though I never intended it to. To me, it was just the sound my mother used when she wanted me to come home before the twin suns set. To others, apparently, it was something else entirely. I didn't know that yet when the royal summons arrived. The message came through the old courier band, the kind most governments had abandoned centuries ago. It bypassed corporate relays, skipped civilian nets, and went straight to my ship's receiver with a priority code that made every warning light flare red. I was orbiting a dust-choked mining world at the edge of the Kelrith expanse, halfway through repairs on my jump stabilizer. My ship, the Wayfarer's Knot, hummed uneasily as the transmission unfolded into a holographic seal, silver and black, etched with angular symbols that prickled behind my eyes when I looked at them too long. Royal crest. Alien. Ancient. This has to be a mistake, I muttered, wiping grease from my hands. The message resolved into text and sound. Formal. Precise. Unarguable. By decree of Her Celestial Majesty, Queen Asareth of Verilion, you are summoned to the Crystal Court. Your presence is required within 3 standard cycles. Failure to comply will be interpreted as refusal. No explanation. No context. Just my name, spoken perfectly, with the strange lilting inflection of the Verilion tongue. I replayed it twice, then a third time. Queen Asareth. Verilion. The name stirred something old and uncomfortable in my chest, like a scar aching before a storm. I hadn't thought about Verilion in years. I had worked hard not to. Back then, I was younger, less careful, still foolish enough to believe that if you did the right thing, the universe would notice and maybe even reward you. I laughed softly at that memory, powered down my tools, and stared out at the stars. Refusing a royal summons, especially from a species as powerful as the Verilions, wasn't really an option. Neither was pretending I didn't know why they might be calling me. 3 cycles later, the Wayfarer's Knot slipped out of jump space at the edge of the Verilion system. Even after all these years, the sight stole my breath. Verilion Prime hung at the center like a living jewel, its atmosphere refracting starlight into bands of violet, gold, and deep ocean blue. Vast ring structures encircled the planet, not metallic like human constructions but grown, organic arches of crystal and light, humming softly across the void. As I approached, my ship was met by an escort of sleek, mantis-shaped vessels. Their hulls shimmered, bending light around them, and I felt the familiar pressure of Verilion scanning arrays brushing against my mind. Not invasive, just curious. The docking bay of the Crystal Court was cavernous and impossibly elegant. Floors of translucent crystal revealed flowing energy beneath, like veins in living stone. Tall figures waited as my ramp lowered. Verilion guards, their elongated forms draped in ceremonial armor that glowed faintly with bioluminescent patterns. They didn't speak as they escorted me through the halls. The Crystal Court itself was breathtaking. A vast chamber opened to the sky, with crystalline spires rising like frozen lightning toward the clouds above. Light refracted everywhere, scattering into rainbows that danced across the assembled nobles. At the far end, upon a raised dais grown seamlessly from the floor, stood the throne, and upon it sat the queen. Asareth of Verilion was taller than I remembered, or perhaps memory had shrunk her over time. Her form was slender and powerful, her skin a deep, iridescent blue shot through with veins of silver light. A crown of living crystal arced back from her brow, pulsing softly in time with her breath. Her eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern, were fixed on me as I was brought forward. The court murmured. Humans were rare here. Familiar, but still unusual. A herald stepped forward, voice amplified by the chamber itself, presenting Marcus Hale of Terra, summoned by royal decree. The moment my name echoed through the crystal court, everything changed. The queen froze. It wasn't dramatic. No gasp, no sudden movement. It was subtler than that, and far more unsettling. The light along her crown flickered. One of her hands tightened against the arm of the throne. Silence fell so abruptly it felt like pressure on my ears. For a long heartbeat, Asareth simply stared at me. Then she rose, slowly, as though gravity itself had shifted. "You," she said. The word wasn't accusation or anger. It was recognition. The court erupted into whispers, but she raised a hand, and they fell silent again. "Leave us," Asareth commanded. The nobles hesitated. The guards glanced at one another. "Leave us," she repeated, and this time the crystal beneath her feet flared with power. They obeyed. Moments later, the crystal court stood empty save for the Queen of Verilion and a human spacer who hadn't expected to be remembered. She descended the dais, each step measured. When she stood before me, her presence was overwhelming. Not oppressive, but vast, like standing too close to a star. "I know that name," she said softly. "I never thought I would hear it spoken here again." I swallowed. "Your Majesty, it's been a long time." Her central eye narrowed. "You remember me." "I never forgot," I replied. For a while, neither of us spoke. The air between us hummed with restrained energy and unspoken history. Finally, she turned away, gesturing for me to follow. "Come. There are things my court must never hear, and debts that must finally be acknowledged." She led me through a side passage into a smaller chamber, private, intimate, lined with softly glowing crystal growths that responded to her presence. When the doors sealed behind us, the queen's shoulders sagged, just a fraction. "You saved my life," she said. The words echoed in the quiet room. Years ago, before she was queen, before I was anything more than a wandering medic for hire, Verilion had been at war. A brutal, internal conflict over succession rights, fought in shadows and assassinations rather than open fleets. I'd been passing through the system when my ship intercepted a distress signal, faint, encrypted, alien. I could have ignored it. Most did. Instead, I followed it to a dying scout vessel hidden in a debris field. Inside, I'd found her. Not a queen, not even royalty in that moment. Just a wounded Verilion woman, bleeding luminous fluid onto the deck, her life force flickering dangerously low. Assassins had struck her convoy, leaving no survivors they knew of. I treated her the best I could with equipment never meant for her biology. I improvised. I risked contamination. I stayed awake for 3 days straight as we hid among wreckage while enemy ships prowled nearby. When she stabilized, I smuggled her off-world, forged routes, and handed her over to loyalists who could protect her. I never asked her name. I never waited for thanks. I left Verilion space and told myself it was over. I was not yet queen, Asareth said now, voice distant. If I had died then, the throne would have fallen to those who would have torn our world apart. My people would not exist as they do today. She turned back to me, eyes bright with emotion I hadn't expected to see in a ruler. "I searched for you," she continued, quietly, "for years, but you vanished." "I didn't want trouble," I said, "or attention." She gave a soft, almost rueful sound. "You found both anyway." Her expression hardened slightly. "There are those in my court who believe your presence here is coincidence. Others believe it is fate. But all agree on one thing. Your name carries weight now." I frowned. "I don't understand." She extended a hand. Light blossomed, forming a holographic projection of galactic news feeds. Headlines scrolled past: border skirmishes, trade disputes, rising tensions. At the edges of our territory, Asareth said, a coalition is forming. They test our defenses, probe our resolve. They believe Verilion has grown complacent. The projection shifted, showing a symbol I recognized, a fractured star. My stomach tightened. I've seen that mark. On stations. On wrecks. Then you know what it means, she said quietly. They leave no survivors.
And they're searching for something.
For me?
I asked.
For what you represent, Asareth corrected. Proof that the old boundaries between species, between loyalty and compassion, are weaker than we pretend. She studied me carefully. I summoned you not only to repay a debt, Marcus Hale, but to ask you a question that could alter the course of my reign. I met her gaze. Ask. Will you stand with Verilion, she said, not as a subject, but as an ally? The weight of it pressed down on me. I thought of my ship, my quiet routes, the freedom I'd clung to. I also thought of a wounded woman on a dying ship, trusting a stranger because she had no other choice. I'm not a soldier, I said slowly, and I don't belong in courts. Asareth inclined her head. Neither did I once. Silence stretched. Then I nodded. I'll help. On my terms. A faint smile touched her lips. Of course. In the cycles that followed, I learned how deep the fractures truly ran. The coalition was real, and closer than anyone suspected. Assassination attempts followed. Sabotage. Whispered accusations within the court. More than once, my presence became a lightning rod for dissent. Why trust an outsider? They demanded. Why elevate a human? Asareth never wavered. And when the coalition finally struck, it wasn't with fleets, but with information, exposing secrets, sowing doubt, trying to turn Verilion against its queen. They failed, because I recognized their patterns, their methods. I had seen them before, on the frontier, where rules broke down and survival favored the adaptable. Together, we exposed their agents, dismantled their networks, and forced them into the open, where Verilion's strength could no longer be questioned. When it was over, the Crystal Court filled once more, this time with celebration. Asareth stood before her people and spoke my name again. But this time, it was followed by a title I hadn't expected. Guardian of the Queen. After the ceremony, as the court dispersed, she joined me on a balcony overlooking her radiant world. You could stay, she said. Many would welcome it. I smiled faintly. I'm not built for thrones. She nodded, understanding. But you will not vanish again. No, I agreed. I won't. As my ship later pulled away from Verilion Prime, I looked back at the living jewel of a planet and thought about how strange the universe could be. I had saved a life once, without knowing whose it was. Years later, that life had frozen an entire court when she heard my name. And somehow, in the vast, indifferent stretch of space, that single choice had echoed farther than I ever imagined. The Wayfarer's not slipped free of Verilion Prime's orbit in silence, its engines burning clean and blue as the living rings of the planet receded into the distance. Marcus kept his hands steady on the controls, even as the gravity well loosened its grip. Only when the navigation console confirmed open space did he finally exhale. For the first time since the summons, he was alone. Stars stretched into familiar patterns as the ship adjusted course, and the comforting hum of old systems filled the cockpit. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, Marcus felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Weight, but not burden. Responsibility. He had left Verilion before without looking back. This time he did. Through the rear viewport, the planet shimmered like a heartbeat of light. Somewhere down there, Asareth stood at the center of a world she had nearly lost, and a throne she had never wanted until she understood what would happen if she didn't claim it. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Incoming transmission. Encrypted. Royal. Marcus hesitated only a moment before accepting. Asareth appeared in holographic form. No crown this time, no ceremonial glow. Just her, standing in a quiet chamber lined with crystalline growths that pulsed gently with her presence. "I suspected you would leave without farewell," she said. He smiled faintly. "You know me too well." Her expression softened. "You came to save a life once and disappeared. I feared you would do the same again." "This time's different," Marcus said. "You don't need saving anymore." "No," she agreed. "But I needed to say this while the court could not hear." She paused, choosing her words carefully, something few rulers ever bothered to do. "The coalition will retreat," Asareth continued. "Not because they fear our fleets, but because they fear precedent. A human standing beside the Verilion throne changes the equation. You have reminded the galaxy that power does not belong solely to bloodlines or species." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That wasn't the plan." "I know," she said, and there was warmth in it. "That is why it worked." Silence lingered between them, comfortable now rather than heavy. "You saved me once in the dark," Asareth said quietly. "And again in the light. Whatever path you walk from here, know that Verilion remembers." "I remember." Marcus met her gaze. "So do I." The transmission ended. The stars stretched again as the wayfarers not jumped to hyperspace, carrying him back into the vast anonymity of the frontier. Weeks passed, then months. Rumors followed him before he ever docked. On trade stations, in refueling hubs, at the edges of lawless systems, his name surfaced in hushed tones. Some said he was the Queen's shadow. Others claimed he commanded fleets or held alien titles no human should possess. Marcus ignored them all. He returned to what he knew: medicine, salvage, helping where the maps thinned and the law faded. But things were different now. People listened faster. Fights ended sooner. And more than once, when danger crept too close, help arrived with suspicious timing. Verilion ships never announced themselves. They didn't need to. The fractured star symbol began to vanish from space lanes. Wrecks stopped appearing. The coalition dissolved not with a final battle, but with silence, the kind that meant survival had finally outweighed ambition. One night, while docked above a quiet agricultural moon, Marcus found a sealed container waiting in his cargo bay. No markings. No escort. Inside was a small crystal device, warm to the touch, pulsing softly in rhythm with his heartbeat. The moment he held it, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. Not words, but presence. Asareth. Not a summons. An anchor. A way to reach one another across impossible distances, should the need ever arise. Marcus laughed quietly and secured the device near the ship's console. "Just in case," he murmured. Years later, history would record Queen Asareth's reign as the era when Verilion stopped standing alone. Trade routes reopened. Border wars cooled. Younger species were brought into negotiations once reserved only for ancient powers. And in more than one council chamber, when resistance stiffened or old hatred resurfaced, a single question would be asked: what would the Guardian think of this? Marcus Hale never returned to the throne. But he didn't vanish either. He became something rarer than legend: proof. Proof that one decision, made in obscurity, could echo across worlds. Proof that mercy could reshape empires. Proof that even in a galaxy ruled by crowns and fleets, a single name could still make a queen freeze, not in fear, but in remembrance. And far from the crystal court, aboard a weathered ship moving steadily between the stars, Marcus sometimes allowed himself a quiet smile. He had saved her once without knowing who she was. And in doing so, he had changed the fate of an entire world, without ever meaning to.